Good morning, class. Today we're going to continue talking about fall harvest. But before we get started on our book, I need someone to tell me which apple they think is the biggest or which apple they think is the smallest. Yes, Miranda?
I think that apple's the smallest.
You do? How come?
Because it looks smaller.
It does. Liz, did you have a different idea?
I think that one's the smallest too because it looks smaller in your hand.
It does. Okay. Julia, anything else?
Yes, I agree. I think this one's bigger than this one.
Okay. Could we use a different word to describe this apple? Yes, Liz?
Tiny.
Tiny. That's a great word. Speaking of tiny, that's actually one of our vocab words today. So we're going to look at our vocab words before we get into our book. You all have a little list in front of you. We're going to start. I'm going to read the word and then read the definition and use it in a sentence. Our first word is announcement. The teacher made an announcement about our homework. An announcement is a statement that gives information. Our next word is contest. A contest is when people compete for being the best. I won the pie eating contest. Judging. Judging is to give an opinion. There were people judging our pie eating contest. Our next word is tiny. That's one of the words that Liz used this morning to describe our apple. Tiny means very small. A mouse is tiny compared to an elephant. Or this apple is tiny compared to this apple. Our next word is biggest. Biggest means to be larger than most or all. So this was the biggest apple out of the two. The word determined is our next word. Determined means to make a decision and not change it. I am determined to read this book today. We will get through this book before the end of class. Our next word is orchard. An orchard is land where fruit trees are planted. Apples grow on trees in an orchard. And our last word today is kneading. Kneading means to work dough with your hands. The baker was kneading the pizza dough. Does anyone have any questions about our new vocab words? No? Okay, just make sure that you're listening for our new vocab words when we read our story today. So before we get started, we're going to take a look at our cover and kind of talk about it. What pictures do you guys see on the front of our cover? Yes, Julia?
I see a big apple.
You do see a big apple. And look, one of the words in our title says biggest. So this might be the biggest apple in the book. We don't know. We'll have to see. Liz, did you see anything else on the page?
A tree.
You do see a tree. Why do you think there's a tree there?
Maybe that's where fruit comes from.
Right. Maybe it's an orchard. Remember, one of our vocab words. Okay, Miranda, do you think you could tell me if you think this book is fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction.
You think it's fiction? How come?
Because most don't have
They don't. And what does fiction mean? Can someone tell me what fiction means to them? Yes, Julia?
It's not real.
Right. Fiction means fake. Fiction and fake. There's a good way to think of it. So our title today is The Biggest Apple Ever. Okay? And our author is Stephen Kroll. What does an author do? Can someone tell me that? Yes, Liz?
Writes words in the story.
They do write the words. And our illustrator is Jenny Bassett. Can someone tell me what an illustrator does? What makes them different from an author? Yes, Julia?
They draw the pictures.
They do draw the pictures. Before we read, we're going to kind of flip through the pictures that our illustrator made for the book. While we're flipping through these and taking a picture walk, I want you guys to think about what you might think the story is going to be about. So kind of make predictions. So don't read any of the words, just kind of look at the pictures. We have a pie. Mice, kind of like on the cover. Is anything really standing out to anyone when we're flipping through these pictures? What about Liz? Do you see anything that you saw on the front cover?
The trees.
The trees. What does that kind of look like to you? There's a lot of trees and they all have the same fruit on them.
Our word, orchard.
Yes, very good. Good job using our new vocabulary words. It does look like they're in an orchard. Keep flipping. Some more trees and apples. A couple more pages left. Okay. Can anyone tell me any of their predictions about what our story will be about today? Yes, Julia?
The mice go to school.
You think they'll go to school? Why do you think that?
Because I saw the mice sitting in desks and riding the school bus, and they were wearing backpacks.
Okay, good job paying attention to the details. Miranda, do you have a suggestion? Do you know what you think is going to happen?
I think maybe the mice are going to eat a bunch of apples at the orchard.
You think so? That's a pretty good guess. We saw a lot of mice and a lot of pictures of them at the orchard. That's a good guess. How about you, Liz?
They're gonna take the apples and maybe do something with them.
Oh, maybe do something. Do you guys know any other things that you can make with apples? Yes, Miranda?
Apple pie.
Ooh, you can make apple pie. Has anyone here ever eaten apple pie before? It's pretty darn good. All right, we'll read the back cover and see if that tells us anything about our story. So the back cover says, once there were two mice who fell in love with the same apple pie, but you had to be there to see how it happened. Do you think that tells you anything else about our book? Kind of seems like we're going to have to read it to find out, don't you think?
Yeah.
Alrighty, so before we get to reading, though, we want to kind of tie this in with the other stuff that we've been talking about in class. So why do you think we're reading this book today? Yes, Liz?
Because we talked about other fall stuff, like foods and stuff.
Right, we talked about other things like fall harvest and the different foods that grow in the fall and different foods that we eat in the fall. What are some other foods? Do you know? Yes, Julia?
Pumpkins.
Pumpkins. There's a lot of pumpkins and pumpkin spice, pumpkin pie, like apple pie. All right, so while we read this story, I just want you guys to keep in mind that we'll have to identify the setting, the main characters, and the plot. What is a plot? Do you remember? Yes, Julia?
The things that happen in the story.
The things that happen. And when there's things that happen, there's usually a problem and a solution. Good. So we'll have to be able to identify the problems and solutions as well. So we'll get started. Okay. Once there were two mice who fell in love with the same apple pie, but you had to be there to see how it happened. On opening day at Mouseville School, the principal, Mr. Mouser, made an announcement. Does anyone remember what an announcement is? Oh, good job flipping back to look.
A statement that gives information.
Okay, so let's see what kind of information he's going to give. We'll be learning about apple pies this fall, and to get things started, we'll have a contest. Whoever brings in the biggest apple to his teacher will win a special prize. The judging will take place on Friday. There was another word in there too, contest and judging. Do we remember what those words mean? Yes, Julia?
A contest is when you compete to be the best.
Right. What about judging? Does anyone remember what judging means?
To give an opinion.
Ooh, to give an opinion and to stick to it, huh? Good luck to everyone, said Mr. Mouser. I have an apple tree in my backyard, said Penelope. I bet it has really big apples. There's an apple tree across from my house, said James. I'm going to climb in it as soon as I get home. I don't have any apple trees, said Clayton, the house mouse, but I'm going to find Mrs. Mousley the biggest apple ever. No, you're not, said his friend Gus Moan. The field mouse. I am, he said. Oh yeah, said Clayton. Yeah, said Desmond. All the way home on the school bus, Clayton and Desmond talked about the contest. There's our vocab word again, contest. Maybe I could grow an apple tree with really big apples, said Clayton. It takes way too long. I heard Mrs. Mousley say 6 years. I'll think of something, said Clayton. So will I, said Desmond. When Clayton got off the bus, he sneaked back into town to see what Penelope and James were up to. Penelope had come down from her tree. She was carrying 2 tiny apples. There's our word tiny again. What does that mean? They're very small. Good job. I like that you raised your hand, Liz. James was still up in the tree across the street. He was picking very small apples. There we go. There's our definition. Tiny is very small apples. Clayton knew he'd seen bigger ones at the market. When Desmond came by a little later, he realized the same thing. The next day at school, Penelope and James brought in their tiny apples. No one else had brought in anything. Mrs. Mousley cleared her throat. Class, we have a lot of work to do. But because we are learning about apples and having an apple contest, we will go to Barnaby's orchard this afternoon. What do you think they're going to see at the orchard? Do you remember when orchard is? Yes, Liz?
Trees with fruit on them.
Right. And because they're having an apple contest, do you think they're going to go see orange trees? No. What kind of trees do you think they're going to go look at? Yes, Miranda? Good guess. Everyone got very excited. I'm going to find the winning apple, said Clayton. I'm going to find the winning apple, said Desmond. At the orchard, Mrs. Mousley pointed out the different kinds of apples. Then everyone disappeared into the trees looking for a winner. Clayton walked down one row, craning his neck. Desmond walked down another row, craning his. Then Clayton saw what he thought was a really big apple. It was too high to reach, but he stretched for it. At that moment, Desmond saw the very same apple on the very same branch. He stretched for it too. They bumped heads and fell down. I think we should bring the apple in together, said Clayton. No one said we couldn't, said Desmond. So they seems like they're going to work together on something, doesn't it? But when they got back to the bus, James had an apple that was even bigger. The apple was so big that he could hardly carry it. Clayton and Desmond looked at each other. What would they do now? What do you think they're going to do? Anyone know? You think they're going to eat the apples? We'll see. That night at dinner, Clayton explained the problem to his dad. Said Dad. Apples don't come in too many sizes. Do you think you'll find a bigger one? I don't know, said Clayton. Then maybe James will win the prize this time. It's okay if he does. Over at Desmond's house, Uncle Vernon said exactly the same thing. But Clayton and Desmond were still determined. The next afternoon, they met at Barnaby's orchard. They picked 2 huge baskets of apples, but nothing they found was bigger than the apple James picked. You know, Clayton said, I think Dad was right. This time, James gets to win, but we've got all these apples. Why don't we bake a big apple pie? Desmond laughed. Great, let's bake the biggest apple pie ever, and we'll make it for our class. Clayton nodded. And I think I know where we'll find a pie pan that's big enough. The following afternoon, Desmond arrived at Clayton's house with Uncle Vernon. Everything's packed up and ready, Clayton said. It's all in Dad's truck. But where are we going? Desmond asked. You'll find out in a minute, said Clayton. Where do you think they're going to go to make a big apple pie? Yeah, Julia?
Maybe to a bakery?
Maybe. That's a pretty good guess, I'd say. Dad drove, with Clayton and Desmond beside him in the front seat. Uncle Vernon stayed in the back with the apples and other ingredients for the giant pie. As they came around the corner, Desmond gasped. Tony's Pizza! Of course, said Clayton. What could be better than a giant pizza pan? Mr. Tony greeted them at the door. Welcome, welcome. We're ready to begin. And so they got to work, making the dough for the crust, kneading it, rolling it out half into a big circle, and spreading it over a deep dish pan. There's that word kneading. Does everyone remember what kneading means? To knead something. Right? You work dough with your hands. Then everyone peeled and sliced the apples, mixed together the sugar and spices, and spread the rest of the dough on top. Wow, said Clayton and Desmond when they were finished. Wow, wow, wow. An hour, said Mr. Tony. Give me an hour. The giant pan just fit in his huge oven. The next day was Friday. Who would have the largest apple? James, of course, and Mr. Mouser handed him the prize. A cheddar cheese apple. Mrs. Mousley looked surprised. Clayton? Desmond? Nothing from you? The two of them grinned. At the same moment, the classroom door flew open. In came Clayton's dad, Uncle Vernon, and Mr. Tony, struggling to carry the giant pie by themselves. Oh, that pie barely fit through the door, huh? How wonderful, said Mrs. Mousley. That's the biggest apple pie ever. We made it for the whole class, said Clayton. All of us together, said Desmond. They shared a high five, and everyone in the class had a very big slice. The end. Okay. So we had some pretty good predictions. They did go to the orchard, right? And it did talk about apple pie. That's great. So after we're done reading, we're going to kind of discuss our story. Does anyone remember the setting of our story? There were a couple different settings. Yes, Liz?
School.
The school was one setting. Any other settings? Yes.
The orchard.
The orchard. Pretty good. There's probably one more main one. Can anyone think of it? Yes, Liz? The pizza place where they made their pie. That's a great job. Great job. Can anyone remember the main characters of the story? Yes, Julia?
Desmond.
Okay. He was one of our main characters, and Clayton. Why do you think they were the main characters? What makes you say that they were the main characters? Yes, Miranda? Right. They were the ones that were talked about most. They were the ones at the end who had the biggest apple pie. Was there a problem in the story? What was the problem that was presented to the students? Yes, Julia?
They wanted to be the ones who found the biggest apple.
Right. They wanted to be the ones who found the biggest apple, and mainly Clayton and Desmond. So how did they solve their problem? What did they do instead of finding the biggest apple? Yes, Liz?
They made the biggest pie.
They did. They made the biggest pie, which was good because then in the end they could all share. Now I'm going to ask you a couple other questions, and then we'll go back to our centers and we'll do a little activity. Can anyone remind me what the biggest thing in the story was? Remember our word biggest, our vocabulary word. What was the biggest thing in our story? Yes, Liz? Right, the apple. That was the main focus. And what was physically the biggest? What was the biggest picture you could see in the book? What was the biggest thing they made? The pie. The pie was the biggest. What was the conflict or problem in the story? We just talked about it. Can anyone remind me? Yes, Liz?
Who could have the biggest apple?
Right, who could have the biggest apple? And how'd they solve that again? How did Clayton solve that problem? And Desmond? Yes, Liz?
Made the biggest pie.
They made the biggest pie that they could share with everyone. Okay, so in this story they used apples to make apple pie. Can anyone think of anything else that you can make with apples? We talked about it before our story. Yes, Julia?
Applesauce.
Applesauce. Yes, Miranda?
Apple cider.
Ooh, apple cider. That sounds pretty good. Can you think of anything else? Or do we think we got them all? Think we got them all? That's a good list, I think. What was the difference between the class's apples and Clayton and Desmond's apple pie? What was the main difference? This one might be a little tricky. Yes, Liz?
The class's apples were just apples, but Clayton and Desmond's were like cooked.
They were cooked. That was a good difference. And another difference would be, could the class share one apple, do you think? Do you think all four of us could share this apple? No. But if we made a huge apple pie, could we share that? We could. Okay. And if you were put in this situation, in the same contest, if your teacher came and said, I want everyone to find the biggest apple, do you think you would just bring in the biggest apple so you could have the prize all for yourself, or do you think you would make a big apple pie? And why? Why do you think that? What would you choose, Miranda?
I'd make a big apple pie.
Why? Do you know why you'd make a big apple pie?
So I would put myself on the
You could share, and that's a kind thing to do, to share and to be kind. And then our last thing that we're going to do today is go back to our desks, or you can do them here if you want, and you can give you each a piece of journal paper. But what do we do first when we do journals? We don't draw our picture first. We do what? We write our words. So your prompt today is, if you could choose one conflict in the story and change the outcome, how would you change it? Does everyone have a good idea? Okay, I'm going to pass out some pencils. And let's use markers today. That sounds fun. Everyone can kind of pick a marker. Make sure we're doing our writing first. And what should you always put on your paper too? Your name, so I know whose it is.
Can you tell us what you find out again?
Yeah, of course. So if you could choose one conflict in the story and change the outcome, how could you change it? How would it be different? And could you rewrite a solution? So the problem in our story today was trying to find the biggest apple. So in your journal, you're going to write if you would go and find the biggest apple, or what else you would do. So we talked about, like, they made a big apple pie, but what are some other things you could do to solve the problem? And when everyone's done, we'll kind of go around and share and talk about our journals. Did anyone decide to use one of our vocab words in their journals? Liz, you did? Great job. It's great to always try to use new words that we're learning about. Does anyone want to share their journal entry today? Go ahead. Go ahead, Miranda.
I said I would go and find enough apples so everyone could have apple cider.
Ooh, that'd be pretty good. That sounds yummy. Anyone else want to share? Julia?
I said that I would grow my own apple tree in my yard and take really good care of it so that it grows a really big apple.
That's a good idea. That's pretty good. Liz, did you want to share your idea?
Sure. I said I would get together with a whole class and make an even bigger amount of applesauce.
That's a pretty good idea too. I wrote about making applesauce as well. Does anyone want to kind of summarize the story for us one last time? Tell us what our story was about? Yes, Liz?
So a mouse class had to go on a field trip to find the biggest apple, and one of the mice found the biggest apple, and the other kids didn't. but they wanted to make a big thing for everyone to share, so they decided to make apple pie.
Good job. All right. Awesome job, guys. So tonight, before you leave, make sure we're going to let everyone grab a book off the shelf in the back, and you guys can do the same thing. I'll give you all another piece of journal paper, and when you're done reading the story at home with your parents, you can kind of summarize the story. You can do a picture walk beforehand, and then do your journal and do the same thing. You're going to pick one problem and change the solution and change how you would solve it. So good job today, everyone. Great job.